You tell yourself you're busy. You say it like it explains everything, like it answers the question before it's even asked. Busy sounds responsible. Busy sounds important. Busy sounds like effort. But busy is often just noise you hide behind so you don't have to be honest with yourself. You stay in motion on purpose. You fill your days until there's no quiet left, because quiet would force you to notice things you've been avoiding. So you keep moving. One task into another, one screen into another. One obligation stacked on top of the next. You call it discipline. You call it ambition. But deep down, you know it's something else. You're not busy because everything matters. You're busy because stopping feels dangerous. Stopping would leave you alone with thoughts you don't want to hear, questions you don't want to answer, feelings you've learned to drown out with activity. So you stay occupied, not productive, occupied. You tell yourself you don't have time, but time isn't the problem. Honesty is. You don't want to admit what you're actually avoiding. You don't want to say out loud that some things scare you, that some things feel heavy, that some things might expose how little control you actually have. So you keep your schedule full and your mind distracted. You answer messages quickly. You take on extra work. You say yes when you should say no, not because you care that much, but because being needed is safer than being still. Being needed gives you a role. Being still takes it away. You confuse motion with progress. You confuse exhaustion with meaning. You wear tiredness like proof, as if being drained means you're doing something right. But most of what drains you isn't growth. It's avoidance dressed up as effort. You tell yourself you'll deal with certain things later, when there's more time, when things calm down, when life slows. But you already know it won't. You make sure of that. You design your life so there's always something next, always something urgent, always something that gives you an excuse to postpone honesty one more day. You don't ask yourself hard questions. You don't want the answers. Questions like whether you actually care about what you're chasing, whether you're proud of how you spend your days, whether the person you're becoming even feels familiar anymore. So instead, you stay busy, because busy doesn't ask anything of you except to keep going. You say you're overwhelmed. But much of that weight comes from things you chose. You chose them because they gave you structure, because they gave you distraction, because they gave you a reason not to look too closely at yourself. You don't feel trapped by busyness. You feel protected by it. When something feels wrong, you don't sit with it. You schedule over it. You scroll past it. You work through it. You treat discomfort like a problem to be buried instead of a signal to be listened to. And the more you ignore it, the louder it gets. So you add more noise. You tell yourself you're being responsible, that you're doing what you're supposed to do. But responsibility without reflection becomes numb routine. You stop asking why. You just keep doing. And over time, you forget what any of it was for. You avoid honesty because honesty would slow you down. It would force you to admit that some of what you're doing doesn't align with who you are, that some of your effort is misplaced, that some of your sacrifices aren't noble. They're just familiar. You don't want to admit that some relationships feel empty, that some goals no longer matter, that some paths you're on were chosen out of fear, not intention. So you stay busy enough not to notice the disconnect. You mistake fullness for fulfillment. Your calendar is full. Your inbox is full. Your head is full. But something essential is missing. And instead of acknowledging that absence, you keep adding more. More tasks, more commitments, more distractions. As if quantity can replace truth. You say you're tired, and you are. But not just physically. You're tired of pretending you don't see what's happening. Tired of maintaining a version of yourself that looks functional from the outside but feels hollow on the inside. Busy keeps that illusion intact. When you're busy, no one asks too much of you. They don't expect reflection. They don't expect depth. They see effort and assume purpose. Even you do. Busy gives you cover. It gives you a story that sounds good enough to stop the questions. But the questions don't go away. They wait. They sit quietly underneath everything you do. And every time you choose activity over honesty, they sink a little deeper, heavier, harder to face. You don't need more time. You need fewer lies. Lies you tell yourself about why you're doing what you're doing. Lies about what really matters to you. Lies about how much of this pace is necessary, and how much of it is self-inflicted. You avoid stillness because stillness would strip away your excuses. It would leave you with no schedule to blame, no urgency to hide behind, just you and the truth you've been postponing. You know there are moments when everything goes quiet for a second, late at night, early in the morning, in between tasks, and for a brief moment, something surfaces, a thought, a feeling, a realization, and almost immediately, you push it away. You reach for something to do, something to check, something to plan, because if you let that moment stay, it might change something, and change feels risky. Busyness feels safe. You're not afraid of failing. You're afraid of stopping and realizing you've been succeeding at the wrong things. That's a harder truth to carry. So you keep moving forward without checking the direction. You tell yourself you're building something, but you rarely stop to look at what you're building toward or what you're leaving behind in the process. Busy doesn't ask for clarity. It just demands endurance. You don't need to collapse. You don't need to escape. You don't need to disappear. You just need to stop pretending that constant motion is the same as living honestly. It isn't. At some point, busyness stops being a phase and becomes an identity. You don't know who you are without it. And that should worry you more than being behind on anything. Because when everything finally slows down, when the noise fades, when there's nothing urgent left to hide behind, you'll still be there, and the truth you avoided will be waiting, silent, patient, unmoved by how busy you were.